Good day, everyone, and welcome to Specno Ventures series as we continue today to talk about practical experiments of how to validate your startup idea, get some traction, get your first customers, and get going with the minimum pain and the minimum risk. And I'm excited. Today, we're going to have three product specialists from Specno in the house that will be joining us as we talk through this. And if you're joining us on LinkedIn, you can jump on the comments and the chat in there. Ask us a question. Maybe you're building a startup. Maybe you're trying to figure out how to validate a very specific part of your startup. You're welcome to ask us questions and we can brainstorm it together and see if we can help you today. So I'm going to be inviting our guests from Specno. First up, I've got Max. Hello, Max. Welcome to the conversation. And then Inga is joining us as well, another product specialist at Specno. And Paul. Welcome, team.
Hey, Raina, nice to be here.
Awesome. Excited to be chatting about product validation today. And, when you're building a venture, obviously there's a lot of parts to it, but, in the modern times that we're building businesses, a big part of it is building a digital product. And when you're building a digital product, there's some nuances, some things that one needs to look out for. And it's quite different than traditional businesses. And I think the most practical example I can share is if you're building for, let's say, a supermarket, a real life one, not a digital online e-commerce store with fancy delivery. But let's say you're building a supermarket in an area. You can do a lot of research, figure out how many families live close by, like what their estimated income would be. And from that, you can project whether or not a business is going to be successful before you actually make that investment to build that supermarket. Now, when we talk about building digital products, it's quite different because often we're building something that never existed before. So there's not a lot of data points that we can use to build a business model. So instead of finding a lot of data or even spending a tremendous amount of money to get data that's not really that reliable, validation experiments become really important for us because we can do small little iterations of different things to learn both qualitative and quantitative data or get that kind of data back and to test our assumptions and to build out this business that has a good chance of success. So that's what today is all about. It's like we're going to test some assumption, or we're going to share some practical experiments of how to test these assumptions, what you can do, and maybe dive into some examples of projects that Specno has worked on. Like I said before, if any of you watching live on LinkedIn have a question, jump in. We've got the experts right here, people. They can answer your questions live. They've been prepping all night, all week. And we're gonna jump right in and get going with this stuff. But if you want to make us uncomfortable, give us your best question in the comments. It's going to be amazing. So I'm going to start with Max. Max, the first kind of experiment we're going to talk about here is the landing page. So when you first get going with an idea, you need to figure out whether or not there's a market for this, right? You need to figure out, is there people that would be interested in this kind of idea being presented in a specific way in a specific channel, and that's where the landing page experiment can be very useful. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Of course. I do love this experiment with all its use cases, but landing pages, as you mentioned, Renier, are a startup's introduction to its anticipated customer base. So it's really, your first interaction. In my opinion, really, really great tool to use. And what makes it so vital is really dependent on the objective you're setting for yourself, with using the landing page. So I think to keep this more practical, let's just go through a bit of an example. So let's say you're developing a new fitness app. Now, there are a lot of fitness apps out there, so we're going to just make an assumption that our app is maybe targeting a really specific audience or unique use case, something like a home workout app for single parents with young kids. It might be pretty difficult to find something aligned in that space. So to start off, you want to set your priority. As I just said, now you want to set that objective of what you're trying to achieve with this use case. So I want to create a landing page as an experiment to identify whether my fitness product idea is, remember we're targeting the niche users. So I want to identify whether my idea app is going to pique the interest of the audience I'm targeting, as well as I want to get 20 signups. So I'm specifically targeting, single parents with young kids doing a specific fitness thing. I want to get 20 signups in that space. Sort of moving on from this, the reason I want to get 20 signups is to go into the interview space with them so I can get a bit more information. But I know my objective, I know what I want to achieve. So my next step is really to design and build the landing page. So there are a lot of really great tools out there. Unbounce, Wix, Squarespace, Webflow. To be honest, even Notion I've seen has been used as a landing page, if not a full website. But yeah, I think the hardest part you're really going to come across with the landing page is designing it. I've built a couple. The design part is always the hardest thing to do. I spend so much time trying to figure out what the color I'm going to use for it is. But I think my biggest piece of advice here is just pick 2 colors that resonate with your brand or your product. So, I mean, if we're looking at the fitness industry, I'm going to go for something earthy, rustic, maybe with a bit of blue, and I'm going to stick to that. So try find a template that exists. I don't want it to be too complicated. I just need an email sign up form. And just go and put it together. I put, and just from experience, you can get a landing page up and running in a day. So it's not a long experiment. It can be super cheap. There are a lot of free tools as well. It's really the email signups, and it's the next steps that they're trying to get you in. So it's easy, free experiment. So that's the starting point. Obviously, when we've got it set up, let's say I've gone and designed and built it now, I need to track some sort of data. I need to know how I'm achieving that objective. So if we're looking at the fitness app, I'm really developing this landing page to get the signups, which is my one objective, but I want to see how people interact with the content I have on the app itself. So I'm going to use something like Hotjar, Google Analytics, test whether people are hovering over certain data, whether they're clicking certain buttons, interested in certain talking points. Once I've set that up though, great. Now I've got the landing page. It's good. I got some analytics. Really important at this stage is you mustn't expect amazing results. So I think a common mistake we all make is that we build a landing page and we expect people are just going to flock to it without actually, doing a bit of, I want to say, effort to drive people to the site. So if I'm going to be building a landing page, part of my strategy needs to be, how am I going to get people to that landing page? So in this case, let's say I've got a bit of a budget. I'm going to drive an Instagram or TikTok advert to specifically target those people, ages between 25 and 35, generally around the single parent age range. Run the ad, drive people to my landing page, and then start looking at the results. Now, as I said, I'm not going to expect to have 50 signups and 100 people contacting me and calling me up and being like, Max, this is great. Like, when are you building this? Can I fund it? That is just not going to happen. So realistically, I'm probably going to get like 5 to 10 people if I'm lucky. But what I do know is that the content I've written for those 5 to 10 people, well, this is my assumption, is, potentially piquing their interest, which is what I wanted. So like I'd say, before I dive into the interview side too much, I will 100% be contacting those people, getting in touch with them by email, maybe see if I can call them, and then scheduling that interview. But maybe just before I move on, Karen, I just want to speak to, I mentioned Hotjar earlier. And the reason I said that is because when you're setting up a landing page, yes, you're getting the signups, really great. But you've got a wealth of information just from the analytics that you've set up. And that's to do with the content on your site. So we might have signed up 5 people, but we have 100 people who visited the site. So let's find out some more information about those people. What did they look at? What did they scroll over? How far did they go down? And just see if we can pull some insights. You're probably not going to find too much information, but you might get a few little gold nuggets here and there. So always good to kind of analyze those results and then literally take the next step, which for me would be actually going into that more interview process, but also determining whether the landing page was successful or not. So
that's awesome, Max. So before we dive into interviews, if we were to break it down, right, we're talking about building a website, a landing page like that within a day. Okay, Webflow, Squarespace, even Notion, but Webflow, Squarespace have templates. You don't even have to be a designer. You can actually slap this together yourself, buy a template. You can be up and running by tomorrow. You buy a domain, right? And then, what I'm hearing you say, the next really critical step is saying, okay, how do I drive 1,000 people to this website, right?
Mm.
And the reason I'm saying 1,000 is, good conversion is typically around up to 5%, right? So if you get 1,000 people coming to your website, you might get, 50 people to
Mm.
show some kind of interest. And then if you try and convert into an early sign up or collecting an email address, anything between 5 and 50 people will probably engage if you're doing a really good job, right? So
Yeah.
if you're getting less than 1,000 people to that page, you might not really get the kind of results you're looking for. So you need to figure out how to get more than 1,000. Now, you mentioned Google Ads. I want to add something in there. This is where proper startup hustle happens, right? How many contacts do you have on WhatsApp? Like, you can put it out there. Like, go for it. Like,
Yeah.
go to events. Like, guerrilla market the crap out of this thing and get 1,000 people there. And what's amazing about this experiment is you can literally do it in the first week of your startup. So if I have a startup idea today, I can literally put that website down tomorrow. Tools like Webflow, Squarespace make it really easy to adjust the messaging as we go along. So a lot of people think, cool, I need to get my website copy perfect before I make the landing page live. It's like you literally change it on the fly as you observe what people are doing and how they're engaging,
Mhm.
and see if you can
Yeah.
get some conversions. Right. So let me ask you this, Max. If you get zero conversions, is that the end of the road? Is that the end of the startup, or what do you do with that?
Yeah, so I think that's probably going to be a really common thing you'll experience in that case. But yeah, I mean, for me personally, this is your starting point. So whether you need to determine, like, maybe you're not targeting the right audience, especially if it's a paid advert, maybe you're not targeting the right audience, you need to change it up. Or you just need to run a completely different experiment. Maybe a landing page isn't the thing you should be focusing on most at this point. Maybe it's actually just doing the hard startup hustle and going out chatting to people and handing out flyers, whatever the case is. I know there's a ton of
Yeah.
different experiments we're going to be chatting about, but landing page is your access to the digital space. So it allows you to kind of scale, not just contact the people close and around you, but across different countries, whatever that case is, depending on who you're targeting. But yeah, I mean, it's never the end of the road if we don't get any signups. Let's change the content, keep adapting, maybe even change aspects of the idea or value proposition that we're showcasing. See when and where we do eventually get some sort of interest. But yeah, I think I wouldn't waste too much money on driving too much marketing towards the landing page if it wasn't giving me any results.
And I've seen in the B2B space, right? If you're building something for a business, like, let's say you're building a tool for developers or stuff like that, if you drive people to sign up for an early beta, which is simply give your email address, it's a great way to actually get your first customer. Like, if you have a little pilot that you want to roll out to them, I think it's really useful. But let's move over into customer interviews. Now, this is probably one of the most common experiments out there. Like, people always tell you, you have to speak to customers, you have to do those things. So we're not going to talk about the obvious stuff. Max, I actually want to talk about two specific things. The first thing is, these users, like, how do you engage them and actually get them interested to participate in something that's going to cost them time? And then the second thing, like, how do you frame proper questions? Like, as a startup founder, you typically want a win. You want to hear the good answers that they love your product, but and that leads us to a trap of asking questions which give us answers but not really tell us something. Give us the answers we want to hear, not the answers we need to hear. So let's firstly go. How do you get customers to want to give you an interview, and then onto leading questions versus non-leading questions?
Perfect. Yeah. Well, I think, as you said, interviews are incredibly important, and we all understand that. So I'm going to go from two aspects here. One is, if we go from the fitness app and we've done our landing page and we've got a few people who've piqued that interest, that gives you a really good starting ground, because you know that they've given up something. They've given up their own personal information. So you can use that as, the starting point of your conversation. But let's say you got no signups. So now you're just kind of cold approaching people, or you've reached out to your own community and see if anyone's keen. Now, from that perspective, you need to create a nice common ground for you. So personally, I would offer someone to or buy them a cup of coffee, meet with them in person if you can, take them to the nearest bootleggers. It's a comfortable environment. It's easy. It's common. It's safe. And it's also really calm, because that's quite important with an interview. You don't want to make it seem like you're expecting a lot from that type of person, because you're not going to put them in a comfortable space. But it's also really important to do a bit of prep on your side. The last thing you want to do is waste your time or waste the person's time that you're interviewing. So you're going to need to come up with a few questions, do a bit of planning, prep before. These questions I usually do in sort of two formats. One is just your generic sort of questions to set the tone, create a bit of commonality between you and the person. These will be questions like, what work do you do? Do you play any sports? Do you have kids? Remember, we're speaking in the fitness app context at this point. So my questions aren't specifically going to be about that, but I'm leading into that environment. And then as we get a bit more chatting, get a bit more comfortable, start leading into the more product specific questions. And I think a really important thing to bring out here, Rainier, is that we spoke a little bit about leading questions. So we want to try avoid taking the person we're interviewing down a narrow rabbit hole of giving a yes or no answer or something that we want to hear. So, for example, don't you think it's frustrating when fitness apps don't understand your unique workout preferences? Yes, of course it's frustrating. We know we're going to get that answer. So it's really useless or a waste of time to ask a question in that format. What we want to do is be a lot more broad, something like, can you describe your experience with using fitness apps to help you with your workout routines? This question doesn't assume anything. It doesn't assume a specific challenge or issue, but encourages them to speak about their experience, because that's really what we're there for. And at this stage of the product, we're looking at, discovering what are their, experiences, what are your pain points. So we want it to be quite open-ended. But yeah, that's, I think, quite an important space. Don't lead the person down a rabbit hole of the answer you want to hear.
Yeah, and be genuinely curious. And explore. You don't even have to stay with script, but you get a lot of quantitative data out of qualitative data out of asking these questions. So I think it's really important to have an open mind and ask follow-up questions. So that's great,
it's
man.
true. I mean, interviews are really fun. So it's people literally throw gold at you at every stage. You just need to sit there and listen. And I think a big point here is you should probably speak as little as possible. Just absorb more, listen more, let them speak about their experiences. And then also, probe. You spoke about it just now, ask why to get to the real answers. So if we go, for example, let's say you've asked them the question, they've answered, yes, I've tried a couple of fitness apps, but they're helpful in guiding me through workouts, but I lose interest after a while. You want to probe into that to really get to the nitty gritty of why they've stopped using that app. So why did you lose interest? Now, workouts started feeling repetitive. My kids kept disturbing me. Why? What became repetitive, or what was your biggest challenge in the space? Or kind of deep diving into those really core reasons as to why the current solutions aren't working, without tending towards the future, without giving them your solution or your prospective product. That's not the purpose of what we're trying to do here. And please, no double barrel questions. It happens so often, and you're like, oh, please answer this, and on top of that, please answer this. And if you can, sometimes it goes up to 3 or 4 double barrel questions, and you just kind of sit back and say, poor person who has to answer that.
Good old triple barrel. Doesn't work, man. So Max, in closing, for interviews, maybe quickly, just how many interviews is enough? Are we talking about, do I need to do 50 interviews, 5, 2? How many would give you a good amount?
Yeah, very, very common question. Something that we get asked quite a lot in concept validation or working with clients in the early stages. So realistically, it comes down to, because interviews are so important at every stage of the product, I would say keep going until the information you're receiving back is repetitive. So if you're not getting sort of any value from the interviews, you keep hearing the same thing, then there's, I suppose I'm going to just stop here. One of two things really can happen. One is you're not interviewing the right people. You're not getting a diverse enough, range. You're not getting that differentiation in your responses. So one is maybe you should kind of look at expanding your interview circle. Or the other is maybe you've got the information you need. You know that 10 people have struggled with the exact same issue. Then it's enough. But yeah, I think it's definitely depending on the context, but just if you take those two things into account, 20 interviews is a lot. I'll just put it
Yeah,
that way.
yeah, it's going to cost you a lot of time and effort as well. Great, thanks, Max. So now we've got a landing page. We've done some interviews, and we want to further explore the why and the underlying things that's happening here. Paul, deconstruction isn't something that you hear a lot when we go to startup circles, but it's one of my favorites. And I think it's a very strategic exercise, and a very enjoyable one, actually. So, Paul, tell us a bit about deconstruction and how that can help one validate some of the assumptions we make in building startup.
Sure, sure. I think I need to thank my parents because they always got me Legos and puzzles, and the more Lego pieces you put, the bigger the puzzle looks, right? So, deconstruction is a framework which does something similar. You take these large, complex systems, and that could be looking at your business as well as your product, and looking at them from their most simple elements and being able to compare. So deconstruction is quite binary, right? What you're doing is you're comparing elements on with one of your competitors or with a feature that you want. I can give one example. Let's continue with Max's point on a landing website, right? So websites, you can compare the visuals, the messaging, and the call to action, right? If you had to compare menus, is a full menu bar, more creates more value? Is it the little hamburger menu? Do you want your contact button at the bottom? So when you use deconstruction, what you're actually doing is you're attempting to identify assumptions and values as soon as possible so that you can start comparing what might work and not work, and more importantly, reduce the risk profile. And this is why we want to validate our ideas using deconstruction as a framework.
Just unmute myself. It's all about the reducing of risk, right? And then really critically looking at each element that we've got down and saying, okay, cool. What is how's this actually playing to that which we're trying to achieve?
Correct. There's a few good case studies to help differentiate what maybe value looks like and what risks look like, right? So the best example of value is, let's compare Airbnb. Everybody knows Airbnb. When they came out, they had to really compare against hotels, which was, making good money within their industry, and all various forms of accommodation, right? So with Airbnb, what they did is, if we had to break Airbnb as an idea into its simple elements, it's an online marketplace. It utilizes the spare room in your house or in your home, and you need to be able to trust strangers, right? So now, how do you differentiate at the same time as compare your value with that of a hotel, right? So this is how we break down the service that we're offering into its smallest element and being able to talk off its value. That also allows you to differentiate and know what to work on. In terms of reducing risk profile, the most popular cases are obviously Blockbuster, Kodak, BlackBerry, right? So when you haven't taken the time to deconstruct which parts of your business might need technological upgrades or need to keep up with scientific innovation, you get left behind. And by the time that risk becomes apparent, your competitors are already 5-10 years ahead. And so, in terms of extracting value, try to articulate the smallest element or component of your business and what value that might be, or how that could be compared with a competitor. as well as being able to identify risks early enough so that we can work together at mitigating those risks.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, if we use a practical example, let's say we set on a path to build a streaming service, like a TV streaming service, a Netflix competitor, but for Africa. Two deconstructions we can do is, one, we could look at Netflix and say, okay, what are some of the things that makes Netflix successful? And I think, if you ask me just off the cuff, price point is that really competitive when it comes to the price point compared to, some of the other stuff we have there. Another thing is, a variety of content that they've got, a whole host of content. And then the third one would be accessibility. Now, we're touching very high level, but we can actually break each of these elements down and say, cool, when we're talking about, the amount of content that they've got on the platform, what exactly is it? What kind of content is it? How does it get presented? How does the algorithm present certain things to me? What kind of role does that play in the success in the product, right? So if I'm building a streaming service, maybe it's not a Netflix competitor. It might be a wildlife focused streaming service. Understanding how they do those things and what actually made them win is, something that can really help us in understanding what are the core whys that we need to build into our product to have a good chance of success. And then similarly, along the same thinking, we can look at DSTV, right? We all know their numbers have been dropping. And we can go, well, what is the reason that DSTV's numbers is dropping? Well, perhaps there's a change in people's desire to watch live TV. I don't know when live, apart from sport, other live TV, we don't watch live TV anymore. And perhaps the interface doesn't lean towards watching non-live TV. It doesn't really support the discovery of it, which then points to the fact that when we do discovery on our platform, we need to be cognizant of the fact that discovery is going to be key in making sure there's adoption and stickiness.
Absolutely.
So I think that's really the fun part of the exercise is looking at these businesses and really, and I did it on a very high level, but really drilling down and saying, okay, what is it that actually makes this business successful in this part? Like customer acquisition, price point, growth, stickiness of the product, discoverability, all of that stuff. Like breaking each of those down and say, what is it that makes it work?
And Netflix in that regard is really in the blue ocean space, right? So if you had to think about how Blockbuster, migrated, moved, left, you have to imagine everything was on demand, right? You had to sit in front of your TV at 8 p.m. to watch a movie. And Netflix is saying you should be able to watch your favorite movie anytime. First value add. Second value add was when they were fighting with the movie studios, right? And movie studios are saying, we want to release our favorite Spider-Man film first, and then it'll be on streaming services a month later. Netflix knew it wouldn't be able to provide the same value, and they start producing their own films using the data that they were picking up from their viewers. Like what themes, what genres can we mix a romance and a drama? Can we mix a horror and a comedy? And all of these is being able to work with those assumptions, but continuously innovating. So Netflix is a perfect example where they were actually in multiple terrains, and we're just continuously looking at where is the value, and if we cannot find a cheaper price point, we'll create our own value by doing it ourselves.
Oh, I love that. So just before we go on to the next one, we've got a question here from Max, from Jason on LinkedIn. Remember, if you're on LinkedIn, you can pop us a question. Max, Jason is asking, what are some clever and cost-effective ways to encourage people to respond to interview invitations? The first thing that I can say, people sometimes go, just pay the people, but you get payment bias. If you pay someone a certain fee, they feel responsible to give you the answers you want to hear. So it's not always a good idea to pay people. But Max, what would you say? How do we get people to want to lean in and participate and join?
Oh gosh, I've also been through cold calling, and it's quite painful. But yeah, I'd say maybe before offering something, just make sure you're targeting the right people. So I mean, you're going to want to create, you have an idea of your target user. If you go and call up someone who doesn't fit that profile, which means they're not going to most likely be aligned to the value proposition you're offering, you're not going to get anywhere with that. So when it comes to actually, you know, if you've got the right person in there, then I would say just being a bit buggy, but also just being natural. Like it's, you know, from a phone call to actually getting to that in front of that person in some way or form, or just being really realistic and truthful about where you are, what you're trying to do. Yeah, I would say that probably gives you the most luck. Yeah, a lot of people though don't turn down a good cup of coffee, so it's always a good starting point.
Coffee, let's go. All right, Paul. So let's go jump back into our conversation around deconstruction and then moving on from there. So we've done the deconstruction. We have some ideas. We've gathered. Maybe we've done some customer interviews. We've done the landing page experiment. Maybe a few other experiments. And we're now at a stage where we go, cool. We have a good idea of what we think we should be building. But we need to bring all of this data together, which typically results in us having a scoping session. So can you tell us a bit about scoping sessions, like what goes down there? I mean, traditionally, waterfall building software scoping sessions can be quite long and tedious and boring. How's that different now in modern day startup build? And what are some of the things that one should look out for in these sessions?
Sure. I see. I don't know if you've seen the meme of like Mexican standoffs. That's scoping sessions. You've got all your stakeholders in the room. You've got your developers. You've got the people who are paying for the product. You have your product owner, your QA, and everyone's fighting for these ideas, right? And I think so. Scoping sessions, in its essence, are collaborative. You want as many of your stakeholders, as many as your cross-functional teams. You don't want product owners telling developers what to do or telling designers what to do without getting their input, because by the time it gets waterfall, if by the time the design plans get to the developers are like, we cannot build this function because it doesn't exist. And so the scoping session helps cross-functional teams collaborate and offer insight at the get-go, allowing us to extract value, and more importantly, allowing us to prioritize what we're going to work on. So everybody talks of MVP. I use the term MLP, so most lovable product. And essentially what you want to build is you want to take all the data that you've received and be able to say, okay, we have a whole bunch of things that we can build for our product. Once we have insights from the team, we now need to agree what those priorities are. We can't work on all the features at the same time. And so we have boundaries and priorities set amongst ourselves. We know that if you are Airbnb, being able to match like the person who's got the spare room and the person looking for accommodation is a key function, right? Being able to search the world for all the available rooms could be a future function. And so we start categorizing what we need to build into must-have, wants, and nice-to-have. And must-haves are components and features that you have to have in order for your product to work. And that is what we're trying to define and get to. So have your North Star at the beginning of your scoping session. Have the objective. What are we trying to do? Save the world, right? Whatever your North Star is, whatever that intrinsic value is driving you to build your product, put that at the top of every single question and every single talking point. List all the features and prioritize them. What are must-have features? I sometimes get into scoping sessions where the founder, very candidly says, all the features need to work in order for my product to work. And what happens is that becomes a costly affair. And then instead of having something out in 3 months, you now have something out in 12 months. So when I talk of this MVP and most lovable product, we're actually talking about what is the smallest working unit of your product that you can get out to market? What is the smallest? It doesn't have to be sexy. It needs to work and needs to have a tangible value that you can go out into the world and say, okay, let me test either using Max's method. Let's test and see how this product is reacting. You might be too early, you might be too late for the market. If you look at most digital products, most of them deviated from their very original idea because as they got feedback from their users, right? You continuously have scoping sessions and you're learning. So you're building something, you're refining the idea, you're learning from the feedback, and you're iterating again in small bits. And these scoping sessions remain collaborative, not just at the beginning of a project, but in various forms and agile events. There's always this need to continuously collaborate outside of your department and with the external stakeholders in the room.
Yeah, Paul, I love it, and I think one thing I want to emphasize is, there's a lot of documentation or planning that gets created in startups that just gets made, and it's almost as if it's printed and never edited again. And the iteration part is something I want to emphasize because I think that is so crucial. When you have a business model in startup world, you're actually saying you have a base set of assumptions which you believe would result in something being a sustainable business, right? But it's so important to come back and review those assumptions and actually adjust the course, right? And in the same way, when it comes to scope, like, I'm yet to see a startup where the original anticipated scope ended up being the best thing to build for the startup. It's an iterative process. You put out the first part, you learn a bit, but a lot of people neglect coming back to that scope and say, hey, why is this relevant now? And I think in the same breath, you have to come back and ask the question, why did we think this feature we have on our roadmap was a relevant feature to begin with? Because sometimes we can be so in the flow of seeing where the product goes that we almost forget some of the learnings that we made in the beginning. Right. So I think the iteration is absolutely crucial.
So Rainer, to also, sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
To add as well, the problem with not scoping within boundaries is you start building a product that you don't know what it is. So so every time you have a new client or new user feedback, you're continuously building parts of a software. And then a year down the line, you want to build a product roadmap. You want to know what is the product that you're selling. And you've just spent so long building custom features for all your paying clients that you now have also strayed away from your product roadmap and vision. And so scoping also helps ensure that what you want to build is being built and ensuring that we are looking for the correct users and not just the paying users. It's a give and take.
Awesome. Love that. Inga, we're going to go over to you. We've now scoped the product. We have a relative good idea of what we're going to build, but we actually want to start getting something into the hands of people that will be using it, see how they interact, what they do, get some feedback, and more tangible feedback. Now, we're not talking about like hey, would you like to have an app that does X, Y, Z? We actually want to say, stick it in the hands and go, what do you think of this? But we don't want to be spending our entire budget because we still have lots to learn. And that's where the clickable prototype comes in. Can you maybe share a bit about what the clickable prototype is and how it can be used to validate some assumptions for founders?
Yes, so it's definitely one of my favorite validation experiments just because I can see the immense value it gives founders to have something in their hands to show users to actually test it. And like Max said, there are so many things that you can lead as someone with a question. You can get false narratives in a lot of these experiments, but with a tangible next best thing to the whole app product in your hand to actually show users, it's really an exciting validation project that I've actually learned so much about from the designers at Specno and how actually intuitive you can make this clickable prototype. So it's an advanced stage in the validation preceding the actual app development. So it's again an experiment. It's a digital interactive rendition of the app that can take place after some designs have been made. So let's think of an app, so a discount travel app, for instance. They come to you and they have this idea to launch worldwide, and they want to really target people that travel often and give them some insights to the local market. Now you have many role players in this type of app. You have the vendors, you have the travelers, you have where you're actually going to sell it to them, you have your personal team, you have, like, because it's a worldwide thing you want to launch. So you actually have a lot of user testing to do and a lot of different features that can add value to these different stakeholders. So I think what you do is you define your objective. You do all of these validation experiments that we've just talked about, and now you actually go and design them. You have the features on designs. You get to prototype them in tools like Figma. I know Adobe X also does it. We prefer Figma because it's quite intuitive and nice to do it. And you actually go to your users and say, are these features what you're looking for? Is it intuitive to use? Is it easy to use? How can we simplify? What feedback can we get from these users with an actual product in hand, without having to spend millions on developing a feature that your users might not even want? So you can actually go to the vendors. Is this easy to onboard onto this platform? Is this the way you actually want to display your specials and deals for the users that use it? Is it easy for the users to redeem the code? What is the least friction that these users will actually go through when redeeming a deal? So it's better than what is that English expression about sliced bread? The next best things to sliced bread is it really is. It gets you that product in hand, and also it just gives you so much value. And I love that you guys are talking about iteration, because that's exactly what this clickable prototype is for. It's you need to get that feedback from the users and iterate on your designs to improve. You shouldn't think the clickable prototype is, okay, I have this now, let's build it just like this. Let's get the feedback and use the feedback. I think that's such an important point to make. Sometimes we do these things and we don't record the interviews, or we actually don't have the data somewhere stored somewhere about what someone said about this prototype that they were using. You need to capture that data and use that data to iterate on your designs and your product.
That's awesome. I see we've got a question here. I'd love to answer the question. So Keegan is asking us, how can you prevent losing customers that are using your ugly MVP when South African market is used to getting already iterated apps from abroad? That is a very important question. Paul, what did you say?
Tough question. Very tough question. When you've got polished products already that people are used to, I think there are ways of reducing churn when your product is not polished. And I think the first is set expectations. So, alert your clients that you're in early development. That helps a lot. Don't try and enter the market as if you're this complete product. I think a lot of people are happy to be involved, like in the early parts of a software. They like to know that they've identified it. Have your value proposition, so know how you differentiate from those competitors. Whatever it is, try and always articulate it. I think that always helps in ensuring that individuals know that I'm on this app, even though it has the same feature. Continuous communication and iterate rapidly. So there are some apps that are really good at sending an email even once a week with from the founder or owner, and it's almost sharing our growing pain and our growing story. But the most important thing is iterate rapidly. Some of these big products, they release a new feature once in a while. If you can show your users that you're continuously, rapidly adding these little bits and little performance enhancements and features, trust me, they get to see that journey and start to identify with that journey. And obviously, to end things off, have great support. I know it's a pain. Sometimes the founder is also the person dealing with support emails, but being in the support channel allows you to understand what's going on with your app quickly, approach it, and whether you answer it via email or whether you answer it within a development build, always ensure that you're listening to your support channels. and you will definitely like be identified even when comparing to, you know, a well-established app from San Francisco.
If I can add, I think something that I've noticed from apps, and I actually see Dylan making a comment that's very similar on LinkedIn. Dylan says, interesting. I've seen businesses use the absolute worst of apps and implementations purely because the pinpoints they are facing are being tended to. You know, when you're starting something and there's laser focus on a very specific problem, right? So, you know, often I think in South Africa, I see founders trying to think of every possible thing that could go around it and how to capture an enormous audience. And I think it's out of fear that the market is so small. You know, we add 7 features when we should be nailing 1. You know, if you identify a very, very, very specific problem and you have a damn ugly website and you go, you know, the website and the product's ugly, but we're solving this one problem you have really well, then people go, you know what, I don't care what it looks like. It's actually solving my problem. So, you know, let me get that one problem solved. And then, you know, what ends up happening is as you solve this problem well for people, for 5 customers, for 10, for 100, you start getting feedback of peripheral things and peripheral stuff that they want solved around this problem. And then you start building out a proper looking product, you know, that looks more like some of the more established things. So I think it's probably, you know, when you confront it with the question of, okay, cool, will my MVP be ugly or not? I think that's maybe the wrong question. The right question should really be, is this solving a pressing pain for someone? And, you know, where I've seen it, like, look at specific industries and how they use Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets. Okay, wherever that is being used, there's like, you know, it shouts opportunity. It shouts like, if you can convince this one company to do this one specific thing they're doing using a custom built little tool that you've done, even if it's ugly, you know, then you know you've got your first customer, and from there you can start iterating and building out from there. So look for those opportunities to solve one problem well, and then it can be as ugly as you want it to be. But let's go back into the schedule. Inga, you've shared so beautifully about this clickable prototype. You know, clickable prototype being something typically at Specno, we build it in Figma, and it looks and acts like an app. It imitates a fully functional app, and then we put it in the hand of actual users, and we see how they engage. And we don't actually tell them what to do. Instead, we ask them, you know, to just use the app for executing a specific feature and see how they go about to get it done. What do we do with the info? Like we record these sessions, we record some of the answers, but what do you do after such a session?
So actually, I want Max to jump in here about a tool he told me about called Maze, where you can actually interpret, you know, it's not just based on user research or user questions that they answer, but there's another tool that you can actually gain so many insights that's more easily to read and more easy to get insights off. So Max, would you mind sharing
yeah,
with
perfect.
us?
So I won't take up too much time, but our design team quite often uses a tool called Maze, which actually does all the analytics and tracking for you. So if you do a Figma prototype and you run that through Maze, you can give the app to whichever user you want to. As they navigate and kind of click on different things, all of that's tracked for you. So you don't have to stand there with a video camera or get someone like scribing down notes in the background. That's actually been automated. Really, really great tool. But yeah, can continue.
I think that's such a great tool you can use to actually gain insight to that without, you know, having it in this way or this way. So you have tangible insights about users actually, what features do they go towards? What features do they use the most? Which ones do they click on first? So it's then identify which features resonate with the users the most and focus your resources on that. If there's a button in there that says, you know, send a gift, and nobody clicked on it in your whole prototype testing thing, you know, it's not a feature that is going to resonate with your users. So you don't actually, you know, see some even more building out that specific feature. So tracking that in your testing phase is going to be so important to give you those insights, to know which features to focus on.
Yeah, that's awesome. We've got another question here from Bana Boyant. He says, interesting conversation. We often custom build for one client, but the feature may disadvantage another client? How would you suggest ring fencing features or specific clients, or generalizing releases to the advantage of all clients? Now, look, typically, you get requests to build features that would benefit one client and do nothing for the others. I think it gets a bit complicated if it actually brings a disadvantage to another client. And I think there's no set way to do this. I think one needs to really think about, like, long-term product vision. Where's the product going? And perhaps these clients that are being disadvantaged by these new features, perhaps they're not an ideal client going forward. Or the other way around, the feature is actually not in the best interest of, where the product needs to go going forward. So I think, there's no correct answer, but it really comes down to where the biggest opportunity lies going forward. What I have seen in South Africa, the market is often not big enough to purely go, B2B SaaS, sorry, this is our product, take it or leave it. And I can give you countless examples of people, we've even coined the term for it. We call it software and a service. So it's not software as a service. We need to add a service to it. So I would say, Rana, what you can look at is say, cool, you've got a baseline product, and some of the extra features you sell as a service. You maybe have some people that assist in certain things. I can give you an example of it. I mean, I know OfferZen pivoted their model recently, but OfferZen, they have this recruitment platform, but they also offer the service of helping people in the recruitment process. They have recruiters that work. So it's not a complete SaaS product or a platform product. There's some service work to it. In the same way, JobJack is another example. Like and I'm using two recruiting platforms, but there are some other ones as well. Unfortunately in South Africa, the market doesn't scale big enough where you can completely neglect and ignore the people who have custom requests. We have to build services in for that. So that's what I would do if I were you, Bana. We are going to continue the conversation, Inga. We only, at Specno, we talk a lot about working with early stage startups, but a lot of these have actually gone on to become successful. Match Exchange, really successful, recently won an award. One of the very first clients of Specno, and some other ones, Fund Me Up. We work with some scale ups like Quick at Moment. So there's some other things that play a role in those phases of products, and that's where the fake button can really help us understand whether or not a feature is something that users are interested. Can you tell us a bit about the fake button and what that does for validation of specific things we want to test?
Yeah, I think the name of this experiment is quite self-explanatory. It's literally a fake button you put into your product. So you have now gone through your MVP phase. You have a product on the app stores, or it's a web-based app, but now you're going into, okay, I've identified that there are maybe 3 or 4 features that my users want or have requested. Actually, you need to identify features that there's a need for still. Don't come up with something, totally random to add to your app and see if people engage with it. Identify through this valid experiment. So, for instance, let's think of a social media app where you want to send gifts to other users on the app. It's quite an extensive new feature. So you need to build in a Shopify run through. You need to have checkout. You need to have cart. You need to get the addresses. Is it safe? There's quite a lot of things that can come out of one new feature to implement, and you want to know before you spend the resources if that is actually going to be a successful feature. You have this app and you have users using your app. They are the best people to be testing this with. So it's a really quite an easy addition to your already existing MVP. So you go and you design a nice button that says send a gift. If you really want to go further, you do some designs for the rest of the flow, to give regarding that. But the use the button and adding analytics to that button to see if people are clicking on it, if they want to use this feature. So send a gift is now on your home screen. You can actually look if people want to check out this feature. So it's a really easy way to see if engagement is going to go up with that specific, new feature you want to add. Because there's lots of ways, you can make money off the app, and there's revenue for customers, and you want a user retention, first of all. So your base of money making stays the same, but you want more users to come on with features that really speak to them as well. And this is a really easy way to test if it's going to be profitable for your business. Is it something that is going to get more users? Is it such a feature that so many people interact with that it's actually worth it to spend money on development building that out? It's also a really cool way to validate different features against each other. So if you have two features you want to test, put two fake buttons in and see which one they interact with more. So it's such an easy experiment to dev and put into your app, and gain some very valuable insights before spending a lot of money that's maybe not on the long run.
That's awesome. I love that. And, all of these experiments really comes down to reducing risk, and specifically reducing risk and wasting a substantial amount of money and wasting a substantial amount of time, but also actually learning more about what are the features and focus that will actually make this a success. And you've all shared so beautifully from your experience some of the experiments you do. There are other experiments. At Specno, we do over 54 different kinds of experiments, and today we only touched on 6 of them. So if you want to find out more, you can engage with our team. We're always happy to just chat about like how we do it, even if you're just doing it some of it yourself. Why don't you reach out, and we can point you in the right direction of a resource or the toolkit that you can use to do some validation. And I love this final comment of Dylan. He says, currently dealing with a client that failed to do ample product validation. Production has already started over. After chatting with their potential customers, they now realize the amount of oversights and irrelevant features they thought was going to be the cut off, but all the features they thought were going to be useful were not. And that's really the crux of product validation, is we get to figure out what's going to work and what's not going to work. So that's it for today's venture series. Inga, Max, Paul, thanks so much for joining, and thanks so much for sharing some that you've learned. Connect with these guys on LinkedIn. They love to engage with the community, and they'd love to connect with you. And also be on the lookout for our in-person Founders Den that is coming up soon in partnership with the SA Innovation Summit. These events have become one of the most favorite events on the startup calendar, and we are very excited to be doing one very soon. So follow us on the page as we announce more details in the next coming weeks, and hopefully we get to see you in person there. And thanks so much for joining today. We'll chat to all of you soon in the future. Have a good one, guys.